Thanks.
All right, welcome everybody. We are here to talk about the best of Microsoft Ignite for 2022. Previous Ignites not included. This is the Ignite that happened just a couple weeks ago. I had the benefit of being there in person, and it was a blast. And looking forward to talking a lot about the many different things that were highlighted that week. I almost have too much for this session, so hoping to get through all the interesting content and looking forward to taking your questions and talking about different things that are important to you. Let's kick off. I'm going to launch a little poll. I just want to know how many of you were involved in Ignite any capacity. Did you go to it? Did you watch it remote just a little bit? Did you watch it remote a lot? I'll just launch that here so you guys can fill that guy out. I'll give you just a couple seconds here. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, closing the poll. All right, okay. Wow, zero. 71% was zero. That's why I'm here. Well, I'm glad to be your guide through this. And about 21% was there remote only and watched a little. And maybe one or two people were there in person. Hey, we should have hung out when we were there. I'm glad you were there in person. Sweet. All right. Well, let's talk. Let's go through and kick this guy off. So, if you haven't met me, I'm Nathan Lesnowski. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Concurrency. I am a 13-time Microsoft MVP. I presented at Ignite on the top 10 ways to optimize your Azure environment. I'm an Ironman finisher for Ironman Wisconsin. I've got kids. I've got a dog. I like to do triathlons with my kids, and one of the things I've found in this is that there's always someone faster than you and there's always someone smarter than you. So my goal in this is just to share a little bit about what I know from the Ignite experience that I had, some of the things that I'm excited about, some of the ways that I heard them talk about it. And if you have heard some things that you found exciting or you are excited about coming out of this conversation, I'd love to know what those are too. So this is really just hopefully me sharing some things that you can take away and use or think about or bring forward into the conversations you've been having. And if that's valuable for you, then we've done our job today. So all right, let's dig in. So I've got 14 different topics to hit from Ignite today, and all of these are really interesting. There's a lot of very cool things that are happening in the context of Microsoft Ignite. But one of the things that I want to kick this off with is in Satya Nadella's keynote, one of the main points he hit on was doing more with less. So in the context of each of these items, I'm going to attempt to also extrapolate how doing more with less relates to this topic and why some of the things they're talking about at Ignite are worthwhile for us to understand in the context of the global economy. So before we move forward, I've got a additional poll keeping you paying attention here. Which of these topics is most interesting to you? I really want to get a kind of understanding of who we have here and which of these are the ones that you're like, yeah, I really want to know more about that. And maybe this one's less interesting to me. So I'm going to launch that guy. Doing a word cloud here because the multiple choice poll only had 9 multiple choice options. So had to go from there. I'll give you guys about 15 seconds here to fill this out. Okay. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closing the poll. All right. Well, heavy concentration in Azure Platform, front door, purview, manufacturing and industrial, some strong Power Apps, OpenAI in there. Teams Premium, Identity. Awesome. Thank you so much. That's great. We'll hit all those things. Thank you for answering that. All right, so as we go through this, I'll try to use some more polls as we go, and be sure to ask your questions in the chat since we have a pretty big group here, and we'll dig into those as we go along. I'll try to pause after each section just a little bit. All right, the first one on the list. You'll see I just kind of structured this, by the way. I kind of structured it going from AI and machine learning into manufacturing and sustainability and data through to platform into development and then into conversations surrounding workplace capabilities and then security and identity and then talking a little bit about the cloud skills challenge. So that's sort of how I broke it down. There's really kind of 4 main sections plus the cloud skills challenge just from following along on home standpoint. All right, let's talk a little bit about OpenAI. Man, why bring this up first? OpenAI is the largest natural language processing model in the world. It was constructed probably about a year ago now, and it's based on what's called the GPT-3 natural language processing model. And Microsoft has an exclusive partnership with OpenAI to bring capabilities through natural language processing into core products that we have the capability to use. And the reason why I brought this up in the context of doing more with less is because when they talked about it at Ignite and some of the following conversations where I've seen it in practice, it's really about uniting the relationship between what a person can do with their unique capabilities and what we can accelerate using artificial intelligence. So the first example is sort of a funny example, and it may be one that you go and waste the rest of your day playing with. There's a new capability called DALL-E. I don't know if anybody's played with DALL-E, you know what I'm talking about. If you have not, this is your first opportunity to see something that's both a waste of time and amazing at the same time. So what DALL-E does is it translates human language into machine created images. These are not images that were found on the internet that happen to match a question like Google Images might do. This is a machine actually painting images from a question that you would enter into DALL-E. So this is something that is available right now. You can go sign up for DALL-E. I've actually had my kids go do it because they're playing with it at home. And so example of that would be a dog wearing socks, riding a bike in impressionist style. So you type that in, generate, and what comes out of that is images of dogs wearing socks, riding a bike in impressionist style, as though it were painted. And these are images that were painted uniquely based upon my request. Why is this interesting? Why is it important in a business context? Well, one of the reasons it's important in a business context is it tells you how far natural language processing is moving. And second, it tells you a little bit about the ability for creativity to be combined with what a machine can do. Follow this forward into other practical examples of using natural language processing through bots, using natural language processing in code creation with Azure GitHub Copilot, and even what's coming in Power Apps, which is I would like an app that has a form that fills out these details, and machine, would you go create it for me? So we're seeing the epicenter of machines being able to create based upon input that I provide as a human and then interact with and provide my own unique insights, but can accelerate what a machine is able to do. So I find DALL-E like a precursor to the future of the relationship between humans and machines and creativity. And right now, it's just a really fun way to waste time. But you combine that forward, and this is now an open source model that I can take advantage of and I have access to today. And where this is translated in a very practical way is a new product Microsoft's creating called Microsoft Designer, which is a way for me to create forms or create brochures or different assets based upon templates, pulling from content that would exist in or is created by DALL-E, to be able to build unique and quickly created assets for me to be able to use in marketing or in uniquely created external assets or web pages or assets I'm building, both for internal and external use. The example of a kind of taking something silly and bringing that forward into something which is creative, that in the past, I would need a graphic designer to be able to create this unique image. Now, maybe I actually just ask the computer to build it for me, but I'm still using my own creativity to kind of interact with the computer to create something interesting and exciting. In conjunction with that, as we start leveraging AI further as a core platform in our businesses, from the front end of creation all the way through to the operationalization of AI, one of the things that Microsoft's invested in a lot that I'm really proud of, and I'm not proud of in a sense that like I'm glad that I'm working with Microsoft in this degree, is responsible AI. So you could say, how do I make sure that it's developing something that's appropriate? Is painting a right picture? Or is the model I've built to do analysis of loans or parts or manufacturing lines or my workers or whatever, is it executing on the AI model in a high integrity way, in a low failure rate way, in a way that's avoiding looking and using data in an appropriate way? Well, Microsoft has invested quite a bit in what's called responsible AI. And legacy tools have been very, very like machine learning, data scientist centric. Like you had to be a data scientist to use these tools. But what's continuing to happen is as AI becomes more and more a commodity, like these scenarios, right? Like I'm not a data scientist, yet I'm using AI to be able to enhance the thing I'm doing.
Miller.
On the right-hand side of this,
I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Have a great day.
On the right-hand side of this is a platform that's focused on ensuring that we responsibly use the AI work that we're doing all the way through the other end. And they're doing it so in a way that even a like non-data scientist could potentially take advantage of some of these capabilities. So this is something that was also released at Ignite that's part of the overall AI ecosystem. Also, they released a series of new updated applied AI services, such as a new Azure bot services that uses natural language processing, much of which can lean on OpenAI as part of your model, a new metrics advisor that's tied to IoT metrics, form recognizer, which is tied to importing data from pre-created forms that then get sucked in to be able to be used, using cognitive search or Azure Video Indexer. And what I think is really interesting about these is more and more we're seeing commoditization of common AI tasks that I can pull into data scenarios that I have or custom application development projects to be able to optimize the user experience. And it's more than just kind of the dumb search experience I had before or the poor bot experience I had before. We can do really excellent experiences that represent a real relationship between me and the company that I'm trying to drive. So I'm really happy to see these new capabilities, both on the very creative side, the responsible AI side, and the applied AI side in what Microsoft's doing with their AI services. All of that was talked about in the context then of being able to pull artificial intelligence into what we're doing practically within the manufacturing or other vertical space. And I think manufacturing was a really interesting highlight by Judson Eltoff, who is one of their chief, I don't remember his exact title, but he's really responsible for the sales engine at Microsoft, does a lot in the manufacturing industrial AI space. So one of the things that Microsoft talked quite a bit about at Ignite was about their Microsoft verticalized clouds. And what you're seeing them do, and this is another example of them pulling their capabilities, AI services, commoditized AI services, commoditized manufacturing cloud capabilities into much more readily accessible capabilities for any manufacturer. And so around this circle, you're seeing examples like supply chain execution or digital twins, digital engineering, where they talked about it as like a meta cloud or a meta experience associated with manufacturing. Ultimately, what it really was digital twins. They're talking about how do I model and create virtualized examples of my manufacturing environment, whether it's the floor itself, the supply chain experience, the selling experience, the asset and operational visibility, the worker experience. How do I virtualize my view of that and use tools to be able to drive optimization. So in particular to the ideas of driving more with less, this is a huge opportunity area. Supply chain execution becomes one that we've seen a tremendous amount of optimization. It's certainly something that's gotten a lot of press on the extent to which it's been difficult for companies to work with. Planning and optimization side, supply chain visibility, huge opportunities to be able to take the capital a company has and be able to apply that capital to more value than what that capital is being applied to today. Oh boy, we're getting a little echo there. Okay. Also in the context of the manufacturing site itself and the extent to which that can be further commoditized. Microsoft's doing a lot of partnering with other partner ecosystems that have their fingers into all the different aspects of the industrial IoT ecosystem and be able to pull that data back to be able to help us visualize where are our failure rates, how do we improve the reliability of our manufacturing environment at a cheaper cost. And that's really moving into the Industry 4.0 space where any commoditized, any provider of manufacturing capabilities can take advantage of what's in the manufacturing cloud. So there's a lot in this particular domain. I'd highly recommend Judson Althoff's talk on digital manufacturing, and particularly the conversation surrounding the sort of meta ideas around manufacturing, not because of like I'm putting on the AR glasses conversation part of it, but just because of the sort of digital twin ecosystem and what they're bringing to this case natively. I also talked about a capability called Project Bonsai. Project Bonsai was actually an acquisition by Microsoft, but they've carried this forward quite a bit. This is, again, getting to a conversation where you're building something called Bonsai Brains, essentially self-learning processes. This is the example of it, self-learning around a process. And it's taking game theory into manufacturing. So if you think about self-learning around the in the industry manufacturing OT side, and then also in the context of inventory optimization and supply chain optimization, this is about creating simulation models against what they call the industrial metaverse, which is just essentially the digital twin of what we're doing, and to being able to do so without being a data scientist. And I think that's really exciting. Again, it builds on the things you saw before. A lot of this is things that I don't need to be a data scientist to be able to do, some of which I am. But in this context, another example of being able to pull industry expertise, combine that with what a platform can do for you without having to necessarily invest as much in the data scientist angle, and being able to have the machine do some of this learning for you. So it's as long as you have access to the data. So this is very exciting for any manufacturer to be able to take a look at, simply because it may allow us to bring time, may allow us to shorten the time to value in inspecting the inventory space, the supply chain space, and in the failure space within the manufacturing environments. Also, I mean, certainly you can understand how this could be brought into other industries as well. All right, hit this one, and then we'll pause for a second. So another thing this is really exciting. Microsoft announced this at Ignite, is the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability. And what the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability does is it lets you gather data from your industrial ecosystem and then represent that in different efficiencies that you're producing or not producing, as well as add in logistics sustainability scenarios. So think about like if you're a big logistics company, you're shipping things on trucks. What if I optimized my shipping scenario? How much would that save me from a sustainability standpoint? Obviously, that's also tied to like I'm spending less gas, or I'm spending less on people doing the work, or I'm leaning out the efficiency of the actual process. So this is an example of what that looks like. It's Power Platform based, which is exciting to see them kind of building on the work they've done before in the Power Platform and making that really how they're building many of their applications today. And you can see in here, this is a sort of week over week or month over month grid of the emissions that are happening from a company, where those are spaced within a particular region, sources of those emissions, and then different scopes over certain periods of time. A little bit bigger view of that, broken out even in the context of renewable energy. Where am I using renewable energy? Where am I not? Am I doing better at it? Am I doing worse? Being able to source that and pull it forward. I think it's interesting because companies are seeing driving sustainability as a goal in and of itself, but in the same context of doing more with less, can I get the same outcome by being more efficient as a company? And that's really the question with many of these AI and manufacturing scenarios is, can I use the same capital? Can I use the same delivery trucks, the same people, the same capabilities, and be able to get more outcome from those capabilities without having to spend more, without having to produce more greenhouse gases, or without having to, spend more money on truck shipments? How can I drive a more efficient organization? So, even if you're not into sustainability, at least you can be in this in the context of, well, this is more efficient for my business. Also, an example of like where that inefficiency is coming from, or at least just where the concentration is coming from. And you could look at that as emissions efficiency, or even just where my distribution line is efficient or inefficient. I found this really interesting way to visualize that in the context of scope 1 into location, into types of goods, into factories, and being able to bring that visualization to the forefront. All right. All that feeds into, in order to make this happen, I need data. So, man, there was so much content at Ignite surrounding data governance, surrounding ideas around how I do a better job with understanding what data is used to be able to bring this about. So, like, if I was really excited, like when I came out of this and you said, all right, cool. Like, I love this idea of artificial intelligence, and I want to try to get something from my data to be able to make that happen, whether it's using OpenAI or it's using, commodity machine learning or even high capability machine learning. But I needed to do so based on the context of the data that I had and understanding that picture. Like, there's a common like idea around the picture of the elephant. A elephant, like a blind guy goes up to it, right? It's like it's a tree trunk, it's a rope. They're pulling the tail. It's a rope, or it's a piece of leather. I'm grabbing its ear. The idea is like, can I get the picture of the elephant? Can everyone see the picture of what that actually means from the context of a data state? So data governance kind of factors into that idea. So one of the things that they talked a lot about at Ignite was Purview. Purview is now Microsoft's tooling to apply governance across the entire estate. So that covers the visualization of that estate, as well as applying classifications to that estate. And one thing that they talked a lot about was the ability to apply classifications based upon already known factors, human names, or all sorts of system capabilities that are now available within the Purview platform to allow us to label and apply understanding to the overall data state. So on the left-hand side, I know it's a little difficult to see, but we'll make sure you get this afterward, is a set of different types of classification rules that would be examples of where we'd say, all right, Purview and Microsoft Information Protection, help us to understand in our different systems where this data exists. And maybe, for example, that I have this type of important data in my ecosystem, but it's in an unencrypted database. Or I want to expose this data to my reporting users, but this data is private. It needs to be there, but I don't desire to allow my reporting users to access that data. So it allows me to be able to have a higher degree of understanding of where the data is, how it falls within the hierarchy, and where critical data exists within that hierarchy. So I can apply appropriate meta models in conjunction with that data. So then if I apply an AI model to it, I know I'm applying AI models to the right kind of data and not even giving the model access to data that it shouldn't have access to. So example here of a data hierarchy being mapped by Purview. I think that's pretty exciting to kind of see in a visual way versus just sort of a way, a lot of times people like draw these in Visio or they put it into an Excel spreadsheet. I love the visualization capability that's being created here aside of Purview that requires very little manual intervention to be able to produce, and is getting better and better as they produce new versions of this. So I think Purview in the context of data governance is becoming something really exciting and something that I think is worth doing a lot of investigation around. All right, let's move on to the Azure platform. This is one of the ones that you guys seem to have the most interest in. So let's talk about some of the things that are happening in the Azure platform itself that all this would be built on. So if we're doing AI and data governance, we're doing really any of these workloads that we're doing commodity on, it's all happening in the context of the Azure platform, and there's a lot of that was talked about in this context. Whew. A lot on this list. I'm going to highlight a couple of these. I'm going to just kind of skip over a couple. I think the most important thing that I was excited about coming out of Ignite was the announcement of the Azure Savings Plan for Compute. If you are doing virtual machine migrations to Azure, you can use something called reserved instances, which has been around for a long time. That basically lets you say, I'm putting a virtual machine there, and I'm going to have it there for a year, and it's going to I'm going to make this commit that I'm using this resource. Well, that hasn't existed in a really structured, well-structured way for modern apps resources, for compute resources that are attached to uh, web apps or container apps that I might be using for an extended period of time. So now there's an ability to apply savings plan for compute to those types of resources and get up to a 65% reduction in compute costs. So that means that like a potential company that we've worked with that had built their modern app on Azure and had made has been using a Azure web app, a series of Azure web apps to host that app that previously wasn't getting much of a cost reduction can now get up to a 65% cost reduction on that resource. And that means that many customers spending millions of dollars in that space can significantly reduce their compute costs. Same with log analytics. Log analytics it still is one of the more significant cost areas if you don't steward it right within the Azure environment. Log analytics now has a very rich capability to be able to apply some cost savings features to become more efficient there. They also talked a little bit about a feature called Auto Manage, which is becoming more and more sort of GA. It is GA, but more and more feature rich to a point where an enterprise customer could consider using it. Auto Manage is basically taking all of the capabilities that Microsoft offers from the cloud management plane, backup, monitoring, infrastructure as code, the ability to understand the update state of the virtual machine and update it on a regular basis, and even auto update it, and update it in the context of certain management rules. All of that log management, all of that is in the context of Auto Manage. So when you move a virtual machine into Azure, you can enable Auto Manage just as a like, hey, when I move that virtual machine there, I'm going to ditch my other tools and I'm going to just use what's in the platform. Another example of do more with less, right? When I move if I can get rid of all this extra stuff, this weight that kind of makes it more complicated and less efficient for me to execute, and I can use capabilities right within the platform and even make it simpler for me to use the capabilities right within the platform, Auto Manage is a great way for you to take advantage of that. Another capability I really liked them talking about was this network visibility improvements, basically providing me a better view of understanding the overall network estate that I'm running. Some nice visualizations of that. Spot VMs, which is like a really cheap test VM. Like, hey, it's kind of like saying you can take my VM down when you feel like it, and I don't have a lot of efficiency or long-term stability associated with that VM, but sometimes I don't really care. Like I'm just playing around, and a spot VM is a great way to get some additional cost savings. They announced something called Azure Elastic SAN, which is kind of a way for you to combine a series of storage resources in a similar way to which you'd build an on-premise SAN in Azure. We also have a really exciting capability called Azure Monitor Predictive Autoscale, which is an ability for virtual machines to scale up or scale down on their own. And you could set boundaries on that, but historically you had to do a little bit more work associated with that. If everyone could please go on mute, would appreciate that. If Amy, you could kind of just make sure that happens. Okay. And then the last thing on here, and this just came up the other day when I was talking with a customer, is GitHub Advanced Security for Azure DevOps. So GitHub is the direction that Microsoft is going for dev management, just FYI in general. But it's a long road to get there. And a lot of companies are using Azure DevOps, and it's a great platform. It really is a great platform. There's a ton you can do in it, and many of which is better than what you can do in GitHub at the moment. But for code analysis and additional security capabilities that are to inspect the code before it moves into production, GitHub has done some really interesting things. Now you can pull GitHub Advanced Security into an existing Azure DevOps subscription. So if you're using Azure DevOps and you're doing any kind of code in Azure DevOps, take a strong look at this, because you're probably not using TFVC. You're probably using GitHub or Git as your source code repo approach, and very easy to pull GitHub Advanced Security into that deployment capability. So exciting thing. So research that if that's something that's kind of on your list. Pull this into the cloud native dev space. So many new capabilities in what Microsoft talked about in cloud native dev. Really, especially if you're building something that's in a serverless ecosystem, a lot was talked about at Ignite on this topic. So let's hit it. So cloud native architectures built on essentially what is cloud native. It's cloud native architectures. It's building on things like Kubernetes to deploy microservices, or using Azure App Services or Azure App Container Services as a component of how to deploy these kind of cloud native architectures. It's primarily a microservices based architecture. And the goal for Microsoft is to get to a point where we're not using virtual machines as like the Windows domain join virtual machine concept is essentially like a legacy concept, right? When we build new things, we are attempting to not build those on the legacy Windows domain join virtual machine concept. We're either building it on Kubernetes, we're building it on app services, we're building it on complete serverless infrastructures, SaaS platforms. All of these have a upgradability and supportability that far exceeds what a traditional virtual machine would have. So a lot of announcements surrounding Kubernetes at Ignite. The Kubernetes Fleet Manager, many of you may not be at that point right now, but it's basically a way to manage a bunch of Kubernetes environments. So like if you're building a major scale out architecture that uses containers, and Azure Container Apps is not sufficient for you, then Kubernetes Fleet Manager might be used to build a distributed Kubernetes environment and manage it, both on-prem or in the cloud. That's what they're talking about here with Azure Kubernetes deployments on cloud or in the edge. I have another company I'm working with where they're deploying Azure Stack HCI at their local location, at the edge locations, and in the cloud they're deploying using Azure, and then their Kubernetes environments would stretch between both. They could run edge Kubernetes or even just virtual machines if they wanted to, and then they have them running in the cloud as well, the public cloud. So that was pretty exciting. I'm even more excited, frankly, about this one, Azure Container Apps. So Kubernetes is really complicated. If you haven't been using it yet, like just managing it by itself, it's no wonder they're releasing stuff around Kubernetes management, because it is a dog to manage all that. So Container Apps is like a abstraction that says, I don't have to manage that. I just want to deploy containers into Azure Container Apps and have Microsoft do the work on managing the container ecosystem. And that, I think, is going to be used a lot, just because it represents a much simpler deployment target for a container app or a series of containers that could scale very easily within a customer, versus having to care for the whole Kubernetes environment. So I thought that was pretty exciting. And then they also a lot of new things on Azure Static Web Apps. So if you're playing around or even just learning, like you're starting to just take advantage of what's available, Azure Static Web Apps is a very scalable platform that would be combined with the container ecosystem from an exposure standpoint. So this is kind of how Microsoft sees that distribution ecosystem. They released this picture. I thought this was a pretty good kind of representation of the microservices code to cloud approach. Note that they're showing GitHub here as the primary collaboration and code management ecosystem. And the idea of CI/CD through to a diverse set of locations represents sort of Microsoft's vision that you could be anywhere and you're running these serverless ecosystems. So the idea that like the public cloud is the only place you can do serverless is not the vision that Microsoft has. That like you could be in the public cloud or you could be on the edge, and any one of those places you should be able to do serverless. So this is just a sort of general architecture of the tooling, architecture probably is a better word, of the Azure serverless ecosystem. But if you want to snap this, it's a pretty good understanding of where you should be thinking about, understanding where Microsoft's investment is going. You know, truly the container apps ecosystem where I can deploy containers without having to manage AKS, the natural relationship to Azure Functions for on-demand execution of event-based workloads, being able to receive events and send events, and then also the logic apps. Really, that's kind of a WYSIWYG experience of building functions, if I were to kind of think about it in the same way. Awesome stuff. So much is happening in kind of making this ecosystem easier to manage, even without getting into the conversations about Dapper and Rudder. Dapper particularly being like the science project turn real life thing for container management. That was talked about by Mark Russinovich. That was a pretty good session. Actually, one session I would totally recommend. Look up, many of you probably know who Mark Russinovich is. Mark Russinovich did a session on Azure internals, and also one on kind of Azure new thing. Like, just look up his name and you'll find some really great sessions that you should probably watch. Okay. This is another kind of nice shot of when you think about the ecosystem of cloud native, here are the different elements of that: containers, serverless, data, APIs, and then the pieces that are getting investment in and around those ecosystems. So like for containers, for example, Azure Container Apps, and then for those that actually want to manage their Kubernetes service, right there, right next to it would be the Azure Kubernetes service. So the general Azure cloud native ecosystem, a lot was talked about on this topic. Just there's a ton of advancement happening here.
Pat Doran asked, what was that name that you just mentioned?
Oh yeah, thank you for asking, Pat. Mark Russinovich. I will. You know what I'll do is I'll put it in the chat as we're going here. Hold on, Mark Russinovich. Okay, here I'll put that in the chat right now. He is the guy. Any of you who have used sysinternals, he is the guy who wrote sysinternals, and then became. Oh, thank you, Mark. There you go. He's the guy who wrote sysinternals and is now Microsoft's CTO for Azure. Wow, cool job that would be, huh? Like, he's the CTO for Azure, so he's done a lot of really interesting things there. So absolutely watch some of his sessions. There's a really funny one. If you just kind of want to like kick back and watch a session that had no real value but is interesting, between Mark Russinovich and Scott Hanselman, both kind of like, internet famous Microsoft people. And they were talking about they were playing with Zoomit, and talking about how that got developed and the code base and how he releases it and stuff. That's kind of was worth just kind of watching. But his real sessions, I think, were much better from a value standpoint. Okay, so continuing in the dev space, there was a lot talked about in the context of Power Apps. So Power Apps being Microsoft's low code, no code development platform. And interestingly enough, a lot of the projects that we're in right now are shifting from they're either shifting into doing cloud native development, or they're shifting from having to do full development activities into a low code build scenario where we can get time to value much more quickly than what we used to be able to. So Microsoft has released similar to, they've released an adoption maturity model for the Microsoft Power Apps platform, and very similar to what they did for the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. That's what CAF means. cloud adoption framework. So if you're looking at like, I've got an Azure platform, how can I do a better job of operationalizing that? The Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework is a thing for you. If you are building Power Apps and you're looking to drive maturity there, the new Power Apps maturity model would be the thing for you to be looking into. So I love maturity models because they kind of help you understand where you are within a general ecosystem and how you are, where you're successful, where you're not. So I think this is a really interesting one. Through to like, I'm just playing with this and experimenting, to I'm becoming more repeatable, to I'm driving organizational wide effectiveness with my Power Apps adoption, really kind of low code, no code adoption approach. And I think creating some repeatable assets in this space is just awesome. So huge thanks. But this is the feature that I think in the Power App space is just to die for. So we have so many customers come to us and say, how do we manage our Power Apps environment? So they've created something called managed environments that's intent on basically commoditizing Power Apps governance as far as they can. And there was a tooling set called Power Apps COE Toolkit. And they basically took the COE toolkit and pulled that into a product and made that something that people can largely just turn on within their Power Apps environments to get better visibility around the environment, to drive control around who can use what, especially data estate. Going back to purview, right? That labeling conversation relates directly into the dataverse, which is this idea of what Power Apps can use to be able to expose data to customers, and then using managed environments to be able to say, here's what people are doing. Is this okay with you? Do we want to change the policy that allows them to do what with the Power Apps environment? So this is the location that you should check out for that, aka.ms, and then managed env for Power. Check that out. You can learn more about these. This is an example of what the COE toolkit looks like. So monitor, govern, nurture. There's a lot here on the left-hand side surrounding seeing what's in the environment, the connections, the usage of the environment, it's pretty rich experience. So very easy to set up at this point and then start taking advantage of. And then there's also, like, I think this is one of the more useful things, is just having analytics surrounding what's used. So I've got all these apps created. This is really common, right? You get a lot of apps created within the environment. People are starting to build stuff, especially as you gain popularity with it. What apps are used and which ones are used well and which ones are exposing data that shouldn't be exposed? This is, really what we get to. So the Power Apps and the data, you'd be able to export them and save them and eliminate them or keep them. And then be able to see usage over time. So makers over time, people driving new capabilities over time, just visibility. Just the ability to have more commoditized visibility into the Power Apps environment is so helpful. But this is something that I'm particularly excited about. One of the developers on my team, back a couple of years ago now, even like maybe 1 year ago, he's like, I love this Power Apps thing, but they're using such bad development practices because people just build stuff and push it into production, right? These are no code, low code developers, right? Your goal is just to get them building stuff, but he's totally right. Like, we're using terrible development practices. So now there's a capability to do pipelines in Power Apps. So I can do development, test, production. This was ridiculously annoying before. You had to export it, import it, rename it. It was not a good experience. This is now giving your low-code developers the ability to do pipelines for their environment, and then when these become production level, you can do testing. Because the issue we've seen with many companies is that they've built things. Those things they've built have gone into production, then somebody messed it up and then hurt production. And hurt actual manufacturing or financial services or collaboration processes just because they released something that wasn't ready or broke. and they know it's going to break, and they have difficulty then going back to the old version. So Power Apps Pipelines lets you handle that in a much more consistent way that with what we would expect from like a full homegrown ground up built application that's not using Power Apps. So big win. Take this home to your environment and use it. So I think I like this picture because it kind of takes all the different pieces of the collaborative low code environment and brings the ideas of the picture in terms of how Microsoft's trying to use it on top of some of the other capabilities. So I thought that was just kind of a really nice picture of like how everything kind of fits together. Okay. Whew, that was a lot on apps and platform and development. Let's talk about Viva. So Viva is make sure you're still awake, people. So let's talk a little bit about Viva. Viva is a capability that is around driving employee engagement. So there is an article that was written by Satya Nadella, and that article was about how do we understand the new hybrid work environment and think about driving engagement from our employees rather than spying on our employees, right? Because there's this like digital divide between like people are working hybrid, are they actually working? And then people at home are like, I'm working my butt off, and why doesn't my manager realize this? And there's sort of an out of sight, like lack of trust, there's something broken there in the way people are engaging. And Satya Nadella's recommendation was, this shouldn't be about spying on your employees to determine if they're working. It should be about how do we give everyone the best ability to be a hybrid worker and to execute wherever they are, and to know that we've set them up for success by being effective managers rather than being, effective spiers, or like being constantly skeptical about whether our employees are working, or feeling disconnected from our manager because we don't have that, in-person connection as often. So Viva is about like all those points of engagement, and also draws on some of the things we talked about earlier on the natural language processing space for some of the things we're doing in the sales external engagement domain. All right. So the first piece of that, actually, I'm gonna hit this other thing first, and I'll go back to that one. First example of that would be something called Viva Goals. So Viva Goals is an ability for you to define in your environment the goals for each employee, like the objectives and key results, as they might call it, OKRs, and then relate that goal to different data points that feed into that person's objectives, whether they're engagement objectives that you can get from Viva directly, or they're other metrics that might be in a data source somewhere, selling a certain amount of things, doing a certain amount of things. So this would be an example of an OKR, and then a person and their attainment against that OKR, and you can see kind of examples of that, or tracking over time against that goal. This is in its infancy, but I'm really excited about where this can go, because you could say, let's define a goal for a leader, and then that leader's team, and then that leader's team's team, and how that all builds toward a single target for how the organization is trying to achieve outcomes. And yeah, sometimes we have those kind of like in our ADP or Workday environments, and we're kind of sort of tracking them. I think this is going to do more on the truly engaging around building this in a manageable kind of way. So I think this is something interesting worth investigating. Viva Pulse. If you've ever seen like Qualtrics, their platform, which is kind of even a higher level of this is like doing just pulse surveys. Like, how are you doing? Like, how are you doing today? Like, say, provide me some feedback on what's going on in your life right now. Like, I like this idea of how they're building like all these little touch points of, understanding how our people are doing across the environment, and making us better at having high empathy with our team members that we're interacting with, whether they're managers or not. They are talking a lot about the new Viva landing page. I think what's happening with Viva here in this context, and you can see it with connections as well, is many of the things that we used to use the intranet for are getting commoditized with these tools. So Teams is the collaboration spot. Viva is starting to do a lot of the like interaction, learning, content down. Viva, the Viva connections, like the landing page. You're starting to get to these spots where like it's helping us to do the intranet versus having to go on like our fourth or fifth iteration of building a new intranet. And I'm excited about like commoditizing that experience because like after doing a lot of those projects, I don't find intranets all that special anymore. Like they're like a lot of these things exist in other platforms that, and especially what they're starting to do in Viva. So if you are looking at what you're doing from like a just general collaboration strategy standpoint, and especially a content down, where does the intranet fit into teams? This is kind of where Microsoft is starting to try to answer some of those questions. And then I want to talk about Viva Sales. This is externally focused. So Viva Sales is like have you ever heard of like those bots that you can kind of invite to a sales call? Like you have let's say I have a big customer service team and you call into that customer service team and it says, so your call may be recorded for quality assurance purposes. Well, Viva Sales is kind of like that bot, only better. So this is an example of it taking a call, summarizing it in a recap with the follow-ups that we talked about, the different periods of the call and identifying who was talking, and then the voice to text, and then highlighting certain parts of that we might be wanting to focus on in the conversation as a transcript. I think that's really interesting because it can really provide us better coaching, follow-up. I mean, who wants to do a call that doesn't have strong next steps that we're actually doing something from? I think in the pandemic we had so much meeting for meeting sake that it was annoying. It wasn't worth it for us. This is Viva Sales. Even if it's a sales engine, I think this is going to come in other spots too. It's about getting real actionable next steps out of the conversations that we have. So I think we're investigating Viva Sales, I'll tell you that. But I think this is something to look at. If you have a sales force and you're using Teams for any of the collaboration with those customers that you have, whether it's through a bot or it's through the actual calling engine, Viva Sales is a really nice asset that's comparable to what I was researching with a bunch of other kind of bots that I could pull into these calls that would be alternatives to it. So again, doing more with less, right? The idea is I can use one platform, I can pull these capabilities in, get more out of the conversation that I had, and be stronger in my follow-ups that are tied to it.
Nate,
Okay.
quick question. Is there a deck that shows licensing levels of these new features being rolled out? What comes with E3 versus E5?
Great question. I don't know the answer to that. I will have to look it up, but I'll take that as a person. Speaking of follow-ups, I will take that as an action item, and I'd be happy to help connect you to that content, because I know there is some content on like what's covered in what versions of Viva and what's in E3, what's in E5, and what's not in either of them. Ultimately, there's a bunch of things they've been releasing that are like new license things you have to buy in addition to what you already have. I'd be happy to like get this audience access to that content as a follow-up. Thanks for that question. Send more in and more questions. Stop me. It's always worth answering.
Yeah, we've had a couple in the past I didn't stop you for. Do you mind should we do that at the end, or we can go back?
Well, let's hit the ones we did in the past at the end. Or are there others that I can answer right now you want to hit?
The other ones were from past questions, so we'll go ahead and address those at the end.
Super, okay. Cool. As we're going, if you put them in, Amy will interrupt me going forward. Thank you for that, Amy. Okay. It's a good thing I'm continuing to go though, because we have a lot of content here. Okay, Microsoft Places, totally new capability from Ignite. Idea behind Microsoft Places is to give me visibility as to where people are and better align with how we can work in an office or not in an office, and know like what the ecosystem looks like. So intelligence of where my colleagues are, where is best to collaborate, wayfinding in locations, am I going to have too many people in a location today versus others, as companies kind of scale back those facilities and go to hoteling options. Like, do I know what the right mix is? In some cases it's like no big deal right now, but like maybe it's going to significantly increase or change as we go. So for example, this is a kind of calendar of a person. Are they going to be office or remote in that particular day? What desk are they taking? what percentage of people will be in the office. I think what's interesting about this is it kind of helps us to like drive a certain amount of like, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy if a person comes into the office and nobody's there to collaborate. What if the tooling can help us to say like, yeah, we're getting high density of people coming into the office this day. It's worth it for us all to be here because we get to see each other versus sort of randomness of like, I'm here, I wonder if XYZ is going to be here today. It can kind of help us to create that density around the workspace and then use a ecosystem to be able to see like, where are we? What desks are we at? Can I find people very easily within the spots that I'm in? And then even have from an executive standpoint, like a places report of what is my utilization over time? How can I optimize that space? And then also what's the room booking? Like, am I seeing a high density of room booking versus others? If I contract the office space because more people are working from home, I know that's the case in some of my customers I've been working with. Like they've contracted their office space. They're having people come in now. Now they're having too many people in the office because they don't have enough space for them or enough meeting rooms. Now they can start to kind of measure that and understand what it should look like. Okay, all that's kind of related to what Microsoft released in Teams Premium, which it was sort of, I mean, I'll say tongue in cheek because Microsoft said do more with less, and they released a premium license on Teams. But I think to the core point of this is that, their intent is not only just to say, like, we want you to do more with less, but there a lot of things they're talking about is there's a lot of ancillary tools we choose to do certain things. And if you can use more of one tool and less of like 7 tools to accomplish that goal, we can drive efficiency in both the licensing costs and the people. So I think that's kind of consistent with their historical messaging as well. So I would say the best Teams new feature, and I don't think this is a Teams premium feature, by the way, is this AI enhanced noise canceling. So they did this live. They had the guys who developed it. We were standing in front of them at this like hub location, and the intent. This is more than just kind of like basic noise canceling capabilities. What they did is they created an AI model to be able to understand what human speech looks like, and then know what isn't human speech. Leaf blower, coffee shop, dog barking, music, loud noises, traffic, things like that. Just yesterday, I was on a call with a customer and he had this leaf blower going behind them. And I was just like, I cannot focus with this happening. Like I'm trying to present something to him and the leaf blower was going and it just totally took me off track. So this is really intended to help us to avoid that. So they recorded this live and they had like us make all sorts of noise and do things and then turn it off and turn it on and stuff. And it was just like magical. Like you couldn't even hear it at all. And then they turn off the noise canceling and you heard all the stuff and you turn it back on again and you didn't hear it. So I'm excited about this one as a person who's been in a lot of different locations doing Teams calls. This is pretty sweet. And then I'm not going to go into all these, but there's a lot in Teams Premium. The intelligent recap feature. I think this is my favorite feature, the AI generated tasks, like the idea of just like creating follow-ups for me and then turning them into to-dos that have action items associated with it, I think is really, really exciting. And then this idea around live translations, which I think is not necessarily an issue I run into all the time, but that's mainly because I'm dealing with people that speak my language, but there's a lot of people who don't. So I think that's a pretty exciting capability, especially for people that work internationally. I think that's pretty interesting. And then the intelligent playback, I think, was really interesting, where like you can see where certain things are happening in the context of the meeting. Like I always feel like, when people say record the meeting, it's like who actually goes back and watches the meeting? I mean, people do, but like pretty infrequently. Intelligent playback can be a good way to say like, go watch the meeting at this spot that was tagged by the recap or the natural language translation to say, here's where this content happened. This 5 minutes was worthwhile. That is really, I think, getting us to a point where it's like really worthwhile to record meetings and turn it into something actionable. So I thought that was exciting. And then some other Teams features that are not premium features, but something pretty interesting was video clips, not super high interesting on my book, but some people might find it interesting. The expanded reactions, I think, not so much the emoji thing, but more so the like there's the, there's a like and there's love and things, but like I reviewed it or it's on hold or like, other simple click responses as reactions to chats, I think is cool. Scheduled send. I just did a blog on this one or a LinkedIn post on this one that like scheduled sends are really nice in Outlook. That's combined with Viva, by the way. When you're doing an Outlook email, Viva will say, this is outside the working hours of the person you're sending the email to. Would you like to schedule the send for the next morning? Outlook is, that's a really cool capability because it's not just like it sends them all at 8 o'clock. But also that like I like to work in the evenings. I don't like sending people emails in the evenings because I feel like it forces them to be like anxious about receiving emails from me. So then I can optimize that so they get it where they're during their working hours. And then there's this new @everyone capability for group chats, which is like everyone in the audience. And then yeah, so I think those are scheduled send is basically that Outlook capability for Teams. By the way, I didn't finish that thought, but that capability is a send ability for Teams. All right, identity management.
Quick question.
Oh yeah,
quick question for
yeah.
you. Is there any roadmap to indicate when these new features will be available in the GCC?
Oh, that a good thing for me to look into. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Man, that's like that always gets them late. But yeah, thank you for asking it. I wish I knew the answer to that question, but I will look. I'll take that as an action item for you. I can find out. Any others, Amy?
I have a question. This is Tace.
Yeah, go for it.
When will there be the ability to move materials from one team's environment to another team's environment?
You mean like a team inside the same tenant or a team?
Yes, sir.
That's
inside the same tenant. Moving materials around and recombining channels from one team to another team is impossible, and it's a difficult thing to maintain continuity.
It sure is, because there's separate SharePoint sites behind the scenes, right? That's the main issue, is like it's an actual site collection and it contains content. I have not seen a feature on that, but that would be a good one to submit into the new feature request portal. I would agree with you 100% that would be very worthwhile to have, but I have not seen a feature request on that, or I haven't seen a new feature coming in the pipeline associated with that.
Thank you.
All right, keep your questions coming. I'll keep going, and then we'll hit more of these at the end. The next session group, this is the name of a session. If you're going out to this is free, by the way, go out to Ignite's portal. There's a session BRK216H, it's a hybrid session on identity management, totally worth watching. That covers some of the things I'm about to talk about. But that was definitely worth listening to. There's a new platform Microsoft's talking about called Microsoft Entra. Microsoft Entra is like the umbrella for Active Directory, permissions management, and verified ID. And I'll talk about what all these are. So obviously Azure Active Directory is like the destination of the identity ecosystem, and I've never seen them make it more clear than now. Like they had a session on Azure Active Directory is your destination. And then they've spent a lot of time on Entra surrounding building permissions management workflows into Azure Active Directory as a true identity governance solution, finally, to allow us to decommission FIM and MIM, Microsoft Identity Manager on-premise, and then verified ID, which I'll talk about in a second. So one capability they've built is in Azure Active Directory to allow true identity governance tied to lifecycle workflows. So the creation of a user through to launching custom workflows, through to doing approvals with the hiring manager and the start date itself, and then any assignments that are tied to it from a group standpoint, enablement for the user, and then sending the email and associating them with any channels or things that they're doing. This is something that you either had to use a third-party platform or MIM or FIM to be able to do, and none of those were doing more with less. They required us to get another tool on top of what we already had to be able to do this. So this is building Azure Identity Governance right into Microsoft's cloud platform. So for example, if you have Workday or many other open scenarios are starting to come out here, and then other apps and platforms, you can use these sources to be able to generate the on-prem identity, the cloud identities, the identities within SaaS-based applications, and this was all announced at Ignite. This is not something that Microsoft really had the capability to do well. I mean, the Workday integration kind of existed, but the governance piece that like did more than like provisioning the user really didn't exist yet. And now this logical workflow exists in the platform. So that's pretty exciting. In addition to that, they talked about the 5 states of identity transformation. So I think this is a really important thing for everyone on this call that thinks about their end user computing ecosystem or identity to understand, is that 100% Azure AD join in the cloud is Microsoft's direction. That is the end game. Your source right now at minimum should be cloud attached. So maybe 0 is not connected to the cloud at all. 0 would be like, I'm just Windows domain join. Then I'm cloud attached. Azure AD Connect, this is basically pass-through authentication to on-premise. And then you have the hybrid state, which is I'm hybrid joined to both. So I'm joined to Windows Active Directory and I'm joined to Azure Active Directory. I'd say that's your minimum state right now. If you're not hybrid joined, you can't really use conditional access for your device health, and that's a big risk. So getting a hybrid join with your devices is a really important stage to get to. Then moving to cloud first, which is that I am Azure Active Directory joined. My users, my main source of truth is Azure Active Directory, and the on-premise one is simply a representation of it. So I still have Windows Active Directory on-premise, but it's just a representation of the Cloud Active Directory. Most of you are probably not there right now, but that is where you should try to attain. Number 4 is Windows Active Directory is minimized. That's where we are at Concurrency right now. As a consulting company, certainly that makes it easier for us, but we are Azure AD join. Azure Active Directory is our main administration point. We have a domain controller on premise for a couple lagging things. That's it. And everything else happens in the cloud. And then 100% cloud is where I don't even have an on-premise domain controller at all. Like there is no domain controller. There is no spoon in a sense. So many of you are probably here. You should be here as a minimum, and you should come up with a game plan to get to cloud first. That's probably your like realistic landing point midterm is how do I get to Azure AD joined machines only, and where Azure AD is the provisioning spot and everything else just relates from that versus the hybrid scenario or just a cloud attached scenario where my on-premise Active Directory is my main source ecosystem. Okay. Pushing forward from this, there's a really cool session. Definitely look this up in Ignite. It's the DART session. This is Microsoft's DART security response team talking about ways that you can make your environment more like ways they've had to help customers recover from ransomware and other security disasters. The actual people that do the response talking about that and talking about practical examples. So I've included a couple of those in here. So I think the key thing that I took away from it was the zero trust methodology. I've never seen Microsoft so clear about their identity direction and so clear that like we are the people helping fix broken security environments after people have compromised them. And if you had been at a zero trust methodology, you would have severely mitigated the ability for the actor to be able to move within the environment. Simple things in this list, like, I mean, this is a bigger lift, the zero trust methodology, but like lack of MFA, less than 20% of admin accounts in Azure have MFA enabled on them. It's kind of crazy. Getting to this position where we truly have this security, but reinforcing the core message that if large companies can't secure themselves without zero trust. What makes you think you can? And I think that's a really important kind of point as a take home, that like the things we were doing before don't work anymore. And the modern ways of doing this are really architectural ways to address this problem versus human ways to address this problem. So they reinforced that idea around zero trust principles. And I think that was really worth listening to. It was a good session, especially around the ideas of assuming that something's breached. So nothing should trust anything else, meaning like my idea around a device is Azure AD joined, not on CorpNet, can't talk to anything else, can only talk to applications through conditional access. Like that's totally different than the way most devices are set up today, where they're just kind of CorpNet joined trusters. So adopting zero trust was like a key point that they noted. But then I think another thing, and I didn't even think about this too much until they started talking about it, was the idea of passwordless auth. I'm like, what's the big deal with passwordless? Like, why is this so important? Well, I mean, passwords suck, right? We all know that. But like, then even once you get to passwordless, there's ways to take advantage of that. They said most people at Microsoft will approve a multi-factor authentication request that they did not originate. Whoa, that's a problem. So how do you defeat that? Like if people are approving multi-factor authentication requests, how do you defeat that? Well, one way to defeat it is you do something like number matching, right? Where like you show a number here and on the screen that they did the multi-factor authentication request is you have to match the number on those two things. That you've probably seen that in many of your experiences that are starting to surface in your ecosystem today. And then even showing a map, that's a new release they had from Ignite, is showing a map as to where that authentication request occurred from. So making it more intelligent, having us pause and say, did I actually create this multi-factor authentication request, or was it someone else? And then getting to a point where we truly have eliminated the password. And then matching authentication requests. This is like shifting to another like related topic. Hard shift here. So we just went from like identity and zero trust, but then matching that to like, what can I, as an authenticated individual, access within the environment using identity protection? So remember earlier when we talked about Microsoft Purview, Purview is like, again, their umbrella for all identity, all information protection in governance. So like the databases and the data state all the way through to like individual Word documents is something that Purview covers. And creating auto labeling policies via Purview and Microsoft Information Protection through to the workloads that are managed. So I think it was interesting that they were talking about this in the context of identity and security. And then having curation controls around that content. If I was better planner, I would have moved this forward into the Purview section, but I think this is worth seeing again because it's really an important topic that content needs to be protected based upon its type. And if I can optimize and automate the extent to which classifications that are meaningful to me get applied to that content, I'm much better for it. This is the new hotness. Verifiable credentials. So what is a verifiable credential? A verifiable credential is the idea that I have an ID, a personal ID, that indicates that me, Nathan Lesnowski, have certain attributes that I can verify and use. So let's say I'm a forklift driver. I am going out to drive the forklift, and my ID that I like scan in on the forklift indicates that I am attached to a verifiable credential from an external provider that says, yes, you are a certified forklift driver. So before it lets me start driving the forklift, the external provider that tested me and said, yes, you pass as a certified forklift driver, is now attached to my credential and pass through to the device that's using it. Or it could be like, you know how you go out to LinkedIn and you look up a company's LinkedIn, like they have a certain number of employees, but then you look through their employees and like half those people no longer work there. Like there's maybe you're matching the idea of a relationship between who works here and who doesn't work here. Or like if you're talking about a certification, like I've got a certification as a Microsoft MVP or as a certain external certification I took a test with from Microsoft certifications, verifiable credentials can hold on to that and say, cool, you actually have these certifications. You're a real person that has these certifications and you can use them. So it's trying to create this relationship between an ID that I have that's external from my employer, but relates to things that I carry with me as an individual. Like maybe I'm a physical therapist and I'm licensed physical therapist. So this is the new hotness. This is going to crazy grow because it's really answering a very significant question of like, how do I know that what the person says they have is really what they have? Okay. Next thing, Microsoft Endpoint Management, the shortest name ever by Microsoft. In my A, nobody called it that in the first place. B, it was dumb name. Now it's back to being called Intune, and Intune now covered. So what they did is they had Intune and SCCM, right? Or Intune and Configuration Manager, and then they said everybody's like saying Microsoft's just going to Intune. Microsoft telling us all to go to Intune, which is the obvious direction everybody knew. But they're like, no, we're doing both. And then they decided to cover it all by calling it called Microsoft Endpoint Management, which nobody used. And then now they're like, okay, nobody started using Microsoft Endpoint Management as a name, and now we're just going to call it all Intune. So now Configuration Manager is just a subset of Intune. So this is kind of the key point. Intune is the current and future. If you're not using Intune and you're still using Configuration Manager, you kind of need to get over to Intune and start sunsetting Configuration Manager, because frankly, it's not the destination that people are going toward, and Microsoft's investing in. So it is the clear direction to move to Intune as a cloud managed device for Zero Trust, Azure AD Join. And even if you're sitting in hybrid, Intune is the great destination. I've got huge enterprises going to Intune only. I mean, you are not special enough that you cannot use Intune as your management platform. So just big FYIs on that. The main reason, I think, is conditional access policies. Being able to match the current state of the device and its health and its device conditions to whether I want it to be able to access any organizational resources. Okay, last thing on my list, and then we can hit like any remaining questions you have, is the Cloud Skills Challenge. So I think investing in ourselves individually to learn skills and learn capabilities is so valuable. And sometimes we just kind of get off the horse there and we stop doing it. And the Cloud Skills Challenge was announced at Microsoft Ignite. And basically, by doing any of these cloud skills areas, so if you said like, hey, I want to know about the intelligent cloud platform, I want to be able to know about how to manage Azure, or I want to be an app maker using Power Apps, or I want to be able to better work with production technologies in Azure. There is a learning path for that in the Azure ecosystem that is free. There's a free learning path that has, sections you go through and a pre-test, and that you complete as you go through it. And as you complete a Cloud Skills Challenge, if you complete the whole thing before like middle of November, beginning of November, it's like November 10th or something, you get a free certification test, which you'd be like, oh, woo, I got a free certification test. But for me, I think that's pretty cool, because we have everybody trying to get certifications, as an ongoing thing here at Concurrency. And frankly, I think if you go back to that verifiable credentials thing, right, like we should be trying to have people get certifications, because it kind of relates to like, have I invested in myself to get the skills necessary to be the person that you need in your organization? So this is free. Have them go take the Cloud Skills Challenge. I did a couple of these now, and each one took me about, I don't know. I mean, it says like 20 hours of cloud content, but it really doesn't take that long. I think each one I think I probably got it done in maybe 5 actual hours of studying. And I knew a lot of it already, but I mean, it was still worthwhile. And I went through it about the same speed that a normal person would. So I'd say, a person could easily do this in like 30 minutes a night, something like that, or even give them some time during the day. Absolutely do it. Like, just get your people learning, get your people upskilling, get them taking a new skill they haven't learned before. Even if they don't, like, they'll get the free test, and at the end, like, if they don't pass it, like, okay, well, you still learned a lot. Like, you got somewhere down the road that you wouldn't have gotten if you hadn't gone through this. So I challenged our whole company to do it. I put it out on LinkedIn. I would love to see people on this call challenge their companies to do the Cloud Skills Challenge. You know how the best way to challenge them is to do it yourself. So if you choose to do it yourself and you sort of bring other people along for the ride and say, hey, I'm doing it, you going to do it? You can help them to do that and upskill themselves. Rising tide floats all boats in a sense. Okay, so a couple key takeaways that I had just generally from Ignite, and then we'll hit some more questions. Join the Cloud Skills Challenge, like just do it. I'd say the industry data state is becoming much more complete, like from a go-to-market capability standpoint, it being like a real thing, like not just a vaporware industry cloud, but like a real cloud. And the data state capabilities are very, very complete from a governance standpoint. I think that some of the optimization capabilities on the Azure platform side, there's a lot of cost effectiveness gains that companies can get. So there's good value in having someone inspect your Azure environment to look and see how you can take advantage of some of those gains. The app modernization story is being kicked into high gear. I loved all the practical AI advancements. Just I hope you all go play with DALL-E just for the fun of it, but also to kind of experience how machines can relate to you. And then also the Teams features I thought were great. And then Viva is pretty pretty awesome. I think Viva's something that without a lot of effort we can take advantage of and get pretty substantial gains from the commoditization of the platform. All right, so let's pause here. Man, it's a good thing I kept talking the whole way. We got a lot of content. Let's hit some questions that weren't answered earlier or new ones that you guys have.
Yeah, so earlier on, it was asked, I think during the manufacturing segment, what kinds of investments do you see from an infrastructure and operations team to support digital twinning?
Yeah, great question. Well, the first thing I would say, and we just learned this from another company, is try to invest in your manufacturing floor infrastructure that's already connected in some way. Like you don't have to have the tooling for it, but at least have it connected. Because the hardest part for people to get value from digital twinning is having something that actually is connected. If you have something that's connected, then digital twinning is actually relatively straightforward because you already have data source coming from the platform. So then it's about replacing the way you were doing it before with using the event hubs and the Azure IoT stack. And that's really just kind of understanding and upscaling in that space, which there is some good training on, and certainly we could help with. So yeah, that's digital twins is really just about, can I get the data? And if I can get the data, then the digital twin part becomes easy. If I can't get the data, then that tacks on a lot of extra work that I got to do, and I need to know about like how to use the board and wire it up and get the data from it and get valuable data because it's going to be over a period of time. But yeah, if I can talk to it, then I can get value from digital twins.
Has somebody asked you to post the URL for Power Apps CAF again?
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Thank you for asking that. Maybe I'll do like a LinkedIn post and just kind of put all this stuff in it.
Yeah. And then otherwise that was all. If anybody else has any more questions, you can go ahead and type them in or go off mute and ask.
I've got nowhere to be, so ask your questions away.
Nathan, thanks for putting this on. Are you guys going to be sending this out as a recording or the slides or anything?
We will have it on, we always we'll put this recording on our website, which will be accessible there. And then I would just say, if you want to drop us a note, either in the survey, just that you want the slides, we'll make sure to get those sent to you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd be happy to PDF those slides and send them over. Anything else, folks? Anything else you want me to research? Like thing I might not know at the moment, but I can go find for you.
Hey, Nathan, I would also ask, I think someone else brought it up in the chat, but about some of the timelines for some of these. I know some are indicated when Microsoft sends out those alerts and notifications in Message Center, but I don't know if there was anything specific to Ignite, or they said this is like Q1 2023 or beyond. I don't know if they really clearly define those timelines.
Some of them did, some of them didn't. In the decks that they had. Next time, I think I'm going to do a better job of capturing some of those like timeline slides. But some of them did kind of have like the future state relationship there. The other thing that was useful, I don't know if you guys have downloaded the Book of News. It's kind of hard to read. It's like a super long PDF of all the things they announced. And it actually didn't include all the things I had in here just because they don't include them, but that's also a nice little asset too. So if you guys haven't downloaded the Book of News, that's worthwhile. I can put a link in here.
Sure, thank you.
And then you got another question here, Nate. What does the Viva system run on exactly?
It's entirely SaaS based. You don't install it anywhere. You just enable it as a license. And there's even kind of like sub capabilities. So like, for example, if I wanted to enable Viva Sales, I would just add it into my Dynamics or my Teams interface. It actually works with Salesforce too. So first one they built was the Salesforce one. So Viva Sales, for example, would plug into both CRM and Salesforce through the Teams interface. So it's just an app on Teams. And then for the Viva connections, again, that's sort of a Teams SharePoint feature that gets enabled in your tenant. I guess you could think of it kind of as a Teams SharePoint per feature enablement, if you want to think about it that way. Awesome. Well, I hope that you found this interesting. I know that I talked a lot, but hopefully you got some useful nuggets from this and took it home. And if you want the slide deck, just let us know. I'd be happy to get it over to you, and I'll answer some of those other things that were ones that I didn't know on like an upcoming LinkedIn post that kind of addresses some of those. So if we're not connected on LinkedIn, hit me and get connected, and we'll be happy to make sure you get the answers to those questions. Ooh, yes. Ryan, that is such an awesome post. I know that guy, by the way, who made that MS Portals.io. It is like one of the coolest posts, coolest links. Nice job putting that in there. Thank you. Big time like on that. All right. Everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you around. Don't forget to fill out the survey, by the way, if you